Russia is retaliating against sanctions from Canada and other countries by slapping its own trade restrictions on agricultural and food products. Russia has long been a lucrative market for Canadian agri-food exports, especially in pork. But let's take a quick look at the numbers. Trade between Canada and Russia in the agri-food sector is worth about $580 million a year, and of that, $563 million are exports to Russia from Canada, and less than $17 million are imports to Canada from Russia. 4 out of Canada's top 5 agri-food exports to Russia are pork products, and that represents nearly $545 million. So which country stands to lose the most in this escalating dispute? Joining me now via Skype is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence, James Bezan. In Montreal, Hélène Laverdière is the NDP's International Development Critic. And in Winnipeg, Kevin Lamoureux is the Liberal Deputy House Leader. Hi to all three of you.
Hello.
Hi, Chris. James Bezan, let me start with you. The Canadian government imposed its new round of sanctions against Russia today, and we'll get to that. But Russia retaliated by putting its own, or announcing that it will retaliate with a ban on agricultural imports from Canada and other nations that have imposed these kinds of sanctions. So what do we know about that at this point? What will it mean for Canadian exports to Russia?
Well, we're currently going over the announcement from President Putin to see exactly what type of impact it's going to have. Whether it's targeted at entities or if it's sectoral in nature. It's pretty broad in the language that he used so far. So the devil's going to be in the details, and we'll look at that and work with industry to resolve any losses in market that they experience.
But there is a significant, obviously, impact, presumably, if pork is hit, for example. So when you say that you will step in to help the industries to deal with this, once you know what they are, what might that look like?
Well, of course, it's too early to say. It may be finding alternative markets. One good news story right now is the pork industry. World prices are extremely high. And I know my pork producers here in Manitoba are quite happy with the prices they're receiving. So, yes, they're losing a part of their market potentially in Russia. We're not sure if they're going to target certain exporters from Canada, or if they're going to do a broad sectoral ban from Canada and our allies. So we'll work in concert to try to find alternative marketplaces for them if they can't fill it in the existing market that we have here today.
Okay. Hélène Laverdière, what did you make of both the new sanctions but also Russia's response?
Well, I think that Russia's response, I'm not utterly surprised by Russia's response. I mean, when there were sanctions before, they imposed a travel ban on a number of Canadians, including the NDP Foreign Affairs critic, Paul Dewar. So I'm not utterly surprised, and you'll be happy to see that I agree with James Bezan. I mean, we need to assess the impact, monitor the situation and see what can be done or what needs to be done eventually. But I think there's a need for good assessment to begin with. Now, there's something ironic, though, in this whole situation, because Canadian sanctions are incomplete, basically. There's 3 very important business people, including Mr. Yakunin, who is very close to President Putin, who are on the list of the United States, for example, but are not on the list of Canada. So Canada imposed less sanctions than our partners, despite all the big rhetoric on the issue, but will suffer the same kind of impact.
Let's get to that in a minute. There are 3 business leaders from Russia who are not on our list who have interests in Canada, but I wanted to get to Kevin Lamoureux about what Canada should do in response to a ban on our agricultural products, if anything.
I think what's really important is that we recognize that Canada needs and should be, at least in part, working and watching in terms of the European Union and the USA and trying to complement, and where we can take more specific action, that we do that. I don't think anyone's surprised in terms of what actions Russia has taken in terms of sanctions, nor should Russia be surprised that Canada will participate in its own type of sanctions. sanctions. We need to recognize that what's happening in Ukraine and the impact that it's having on the world. We have literally over 1 million people of Ukrainian heritage alone here in Canada that are watching very closely in terms of what is happening. And it goes well beyond people of just Ukrainian heritage. This is an issue that is important not only in Ukraine, but also here in Canada. So in certain areas, I think that we could be playing a stronger role. For example, we have yet to actually see money flow into Ukraine in terms of supporting their infrastructure and their institutions, whereas other countries around the world, like the U.S. and the European Union, have already seen money flow. So there are some things in which Canada should be doing that maybe we're not doing, and we also then need to look at what other countries around the world and the type of sanctions and actions that they're taking in order to support Ukraine.
Let me come back to James Bezan. Two separate questions. First is, what evidence does the government have that the sanctions that Canada has imposed are having an impact? That would be the first question. And then to Hélène Laverdiere's question about Sergei Chemezov and Yannikin and the other gentlemen who have these interests in Canada who are not on our list. So let's start with the first. What impact is it having?
Well, definitely we're seeing an impact in Russia that just one of their major airlines declared bankruptcy earlier today. We've also seen major foreign investment flee Russia. Their tourism industry is down, and more importantly, they are in a full-scale recession. So the sanctions are biting. To get back to the points that both Lane and Mr. Lamoureux raised, is let's keep things in perspective. Canada has been the leader on sanctions. We have 189 individuals and entities now sanctioned in Ukraine and Russia. Compare that to the Americans of only 90 or the European Union at just over 140. We are definitely leading. Now, we will continue to impose sanctions as needed, and we're going to work in concert with our allies as much as possible. But Prime Minister Harper has been quite clear that our economic interests will not trump our responsibilities to the people of Ukraine and standing in solidarity.
So if a Russian company has interest in Canada, they can escape being on our list of sanctioned individuals and companies?
Not at all. At some point in time, if things continue to escalate, as we move in concert with our allies, you'll see more people added and more entities added to that list. But we're not going to throw everybody on the list right off the bat. Okay.
Hélène Laverdiere, I asked the same question to you. What impact is there? James Bezan says that there's been a bankruptcy of an airline and tourism is down, but I don't see Sir Vladimir Putin showing any signs of relenting.
Well, first, sanctions can take a long time to have a real impact. And secondly, it's always a problem with sanctions is you have to wonder about what would have happened if they hadn't been there, if the sanctions hadn't been there. And this, of course, is guesswork for everybody. So I think it's important. It's important to focus on, particularly on people who are close to Vladimir Putin. And that's why I have to say I'm really not convinced by the answer. You have here 3 people who are on other countries' list and who are not on our list, including, as I was saying, Mr. Yakunin, who's very close to President Putin, and who have business interests or dealings with Canada. And, well, I'd be pleased to hear another reason of why they're not on our list, but the conclusion we have to come to is that they have business. The reason is they have business dealings in Canada, and yes, indeed, we are trumping our foreign policy for very short-term business interests.
Very quickly, Kevin Lamoureux, are you hearing from anybody, farmers in your province, for example, about concerns of what the bans what impact it might have on them?
To date, what we've heard more of is just a concern in regards to what's happening in Ukraine. I think people understand that sanctions is a viable tool that's necessary, and there will be costs, both in Russia and Canada, Ukraine, and other countries that participate in sanctions. Whether it's one way or the other, there will be costs, but there's a bigger picture that we need to look at here, and I think one of the things that we could be doing more of is just working with the many different stakeholders that have a vested interest, that have something to be able to contribute towards ideas at trying to resolve this issue.
All right. I have to leave it there. Thank you to James Bezan, Hélène Laverdiere, and Kevin Lamoureux.
Thank you to you.